Ushers, come on down. We're just going to enter into time of tithes and offerings, and then we'll get rolling. So let me pray. God, we thank you for each gift. We thank you for each giver, and we just pray that you bless both, and just so we could be a people that have an impact on the world around us through our time, through the talents you've given us, but also through the treasure that you've given us as well. We love you. We thank you. Amen. All right. So we're hitting a new series here. We're walking through, we're going to call it Wisdom from Proverbs. So this might be one that pops up every, once a year for a little while, maybe not, I don't know. We're not going to walk through the whole book of Proverbs. I like to do that because I like for people to get the big picture. But Proverbs is wisdom literature, right? So if we were to do that, we'd hit a whole section in the middle of the book where I'd be preaching fortune cookie sounding stuff to you, and it'd be like 10 weeks long, and you'd be like, all right, dude, I get it. I'm not saying fortune cookie in the sense that like it's not useful or great. It's the Bible, so it's deep and it's wise, but it's literally like 2 sentences, and then it moves to the next thing. Does that make sense? And so we're not necessarily going to be rolling through the whole book, but let me give you an idea of how this all lays out. So the book of Proverbs was written by it was written and most likely compiled by King Solomon. So King Solomon was a king of the united nation of Israel. It ends up splitting after Solomon into 2 different kingdoms. Solomon was David's son, so King David is the greatest king in the nation's history. Solomon builds the temple, and also when he becomes king, he asks God for wisdom. So he's considered to be the wisest man in all the earth, right? It's one of those weird moments in the Bible where there's this juxtaposition because Solomon is wise, but he does a lot of dumb stuff as an individual. He has, like 300 some odd wives, 400 some odd concubines, which means that he had no time on his hands at all. I don't understand how that, the reason for that, the reason for all of this is each one of those represented probably some pact or treaty with another kingdom. He's trying to keep the peace, all of that. But then through those wives and concubines, other religions, pagan religions, end up infiltrating the nation of Israel. And so that is one of the things that causes the split later on. So you have kind of this juxtaposition of Solomon and his wisdom literature, right? And also some of the crazy, dumb things he did. The book of Proverbs, the first 9 chapters, is essentially a list of a group of speeches from father to son, interspersed with poems about Lady Wisdom, right? And so it's written by Solomon essentially to his son. The best thing that I can think to describe it is my dad wrote me this book when I graduated high school. And it was this book, and I went back and read it recently because my girls think it's great because it's got all these pictures of me when I was little. They're like, Daddy, that's you? I'm like, yeah, I know, I was there. And so I read it recently, and it was this long, it's just a really long letter. That's kind of what Solomon's doing here in the first 9 chapters. From that, chapter 10 to 29 is those, it's what you think of when you think of Proverbs. It's like 2 sentences and then move on, 2 sentences and then move on, and that it sounds fortune cookie-y, right? It's not that it's that shallow, but it sounds that way. It reads that way. And then chapter 30 is a poem, kind of freestanding. And then chapter 31 is 2 poems, and they're attributed to other writers. So like I said, it's most likely that Solomon wrote the first 9 and then compiled the rest. Does this make sense? And so what we're going to do is for this week, we're going to pull from one of the speeches from father to son. And that's going to be in chapter 3. We're going to go chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. So let me read this to you. My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart. for they will prolong your life many years and bring you peace and prosperity. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win good favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves as a father, the son he delights in. So one other thing you should know about the book of Proverbs is it's a book of probabilities, not a book of promises. This makes sense? I'll explain better. So it's a book of probabilities, not a book of promises. If you read Proverbs and you hear only promises, then you turn God into a vending machine. And it, like any wisdom from a father to a child, it's not, hey, do this, and this, and if you do these things, then this will happen. When we do that and we spiritualize it, that's called witchcraft, right? You're creating a spell with certain ingredients, and you get this outcome. That's called witchcraft. That's not what this is. It's advice as to how we should relate to God and his wisdom. Does this make sense? So it's a book of probabilities. If the one about first fruits, if you give him your first fruits, then you are most likely to live a life that is financially healthy because he will bless you in that area. You see what I'm saying? A track. So it's important that we make this distinction though, because in current American Christianity, we read promises everywhere. And we read promises of God everywhere. And what ends up happening when we do that is we start claiming these promises over our lives all over the place. And then the next thing you know, the gospel is about me and what God has promised me to do for me, right? And that really leads us to the issue, because this whole conversation that we're gonna have today is about trust. And what we have as a huge issue, I think, in American Christianity is the breakdown, a fundamental breakdown of trust between us and God. We find it hard to trust God because we don't put God in his rightful place. We've made the faith about us, right? If we go to chapter 1, verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So this it also says in the passage that we're using, do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and shun evil. This concept of fear of the Lord, in modern terms, we don't like that idea because you should not be afraid of someone you love, right? That's a logical thing that we think all the time. So you should not be afraid of someone you love. But the word fear, to just only see that in the sense of terror is incorrect. That's not how that word is being used here. It's a fear. It is a respect, right? It's a reverence and a respect that is something akin to the fear you may be thinking of, but much deeper and less malicious than that, right? So when I was 4 years old, 5 years old, I don't know, let me be honest. It was somewhere between 4 and 7. It was the very first time that I ever shot a gun. Now, some of you are appalled right now, right? But I come from a redneck family, so that was like late. All right? So it was this little 22 caliber pistol. It was my grandpa's. And we were out back and they allowed me to shoot it. Now my dad stood behind me and held it and all this, but there was a fear that I was taught to have of a firearm because you could kill somebody, right? Now that fear is more than just I'm terrified of it. That fear is a respect. It's a reverence for the power in it. It's a care that you take with it, right? It's much more than when we talk about it, it's much more akin to that than it is just being afraid of someone with malintent, right? And so when we talk about relating to God and the fear of the Lord, here's the thing. The fear of the Lord is really a conversation about him being in his rightful place. Right? Him being in a place where he has enough, where he's given the reverence he deserves. Because the thing about it is, God is first. Why? Because he always has been and he always will be, and he can't be anything other than first. And so when the fundamental breakdown of trust in Western Christianity, to my mind, really starts here. We make the faith about us, thus taking him off the throne. Now we lack trust. Because when things don't go the way I want them to, God must not be good. Like somehow the faith is all about you and what you want to happen. How silly. Right? Sometimes life is just hard and God is still good. Sometimes things don't go the way you want them to. As a matter of fact, sometimes things go in a way that is detrimental to you, but it's still a part of his plan and he's still good. Because his plan is not about you, but it is for you. Right? And so there's the lack of the fear of the Lord causes us not to keep him in his rightful place. And when we take him off the throne and put ourselves on the throne, we no longer trust him when he doesn't do what we want. Like somehow he's a dog that should listen to our every command. Right? Y'all tracking with me? Yes. All right. So that's our ultimate, we got to break down in trust. The basic, like if I were to, I want to give you like this really well thought out, super wise way of fixing this problem. You have to decide to trust him. And you have to decide that he's good. You have to make that choice in your mind. Sometimes you'll have to make that choice often, but you have to decide to trust him. That is the beginning of wisdom. When you make the decision to trust him is when wisdom begins to come into play, when godly wisdom begins to come into play in your life. Until then, you're going to be living in this American Christian limbo. And you're not going to move forward because you're going to be, is God good? Is he bad? Is he good? Is he bad? Is he good? Is he bad? He's good. He's always has been good. He always will be good. Got to decide to trust him, right? So we're going to pick up in verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. So big picture, we got to trust him. The next thing that he's talking about here is we have to trust his guidance. We have to trust his guidance. You see, we have to fix the original trust problem of putting him in his rightful place, because if we don't do that, then we won't trust his guidance. Because we have this problem that culturally we have a huge problem. And it's that our culture is rethinking everything and resorting everything out, and like we're watching this happen live, right? Here's the problem. The principles that we have lived by were somewhat informed by the Bible. The principles that people want us to live by moving forward are not informed by the Bible at all. They're informed by philosophy and other stuff that's just it's not biblical, right? And so what's happening is we're beginning to see this breakdown culturally where the idea of trusting God's guidance, the idea of trusting his word is not even really culturally accepted by a lot of people, because there are some things in his word that are abhorrent to our culture, right? So we have this problem. We have a culture that is increasingly becoming legalistic. So let me define some terms for you as we walk forward, okay? We have a culture that's increasingly becoming legalistic. Now, back in the day, legalism was seen as a Christian problem. And what it was, I mean, if you were to boil it down, legalism is this. It is when we take cultural, moral standards and require every single person to abide by every single one, right? And then all of a sudden it becomes just this bingo game of who's the worst, you know? Now, that was a Christian problem. What's happening now, though, is culture's turned, and our culture is becoming legalistic. So rather than it being a conversation about sin, right? Because the church is taking the opposite tack. We've walked away from legalism to the point that we aren't even sure what sin is anymore, but then the culture is becoming legalistic. And there's this whole bingo card of things. You see what I'm saying? So we have a culture that's legalistic, and then we have a church that's either, we have a church that's moved towards lawlessness, where we've walked away from the rules in fear of being legalistic, right? And here's the thing. I would say that the cure to that is trying to make the delineation between what is sin and what is culturally, morally reprehensible. Because those are two different things. Sin is an infraction. It's a move against God and his stated law. And there are some things that are sinful that are not culturally, morally reprehensible. And there are some things that are culturally, morally reprehensible that aren't necessarily sinful, right? So rather than just saying we don't have rules, which I think is what a lot of the church has done, we don't have rules, we just have love, right? We need to actually do the work of making the distinction. So you have culture that's becoming legalistic by not biblical terms. You have the church that's moved to a place of lawlessness, or we have parts of the church that have moved all the way to this place of, I'm gonna use a weird word, licentiousness, right? Licentiousness. So not only, like I believe in God, right? Like I believe in God, but I have the right, not only do I have the license to sin or live however I want, as long as I believe in him and he is love, so it'll all be fine. Not only do I have the license to do that, I have the right to do that. The church has kind of ended up here, but here's the weirdest thing. And I'm not sure that I'm being as clear as I want to be, but also I'm not sure that it's clearer than mud, the problem. So just roll with me and we'll get there, all right? Culture is right now in our world simultaneously legalistic without biblical principles and by biblical standards entirely licentious. And the church is moving that direction towards full-on licentiousness. That's the Christians are moving that way in an effort, I think, to be loving, right? But love is giving people the wisdom that comes from God. So we have to trust his guidance. We have to trust his guidance. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. There are going to be things in your life where you're going to want to go one way or the other, and culture will tell you to go the opposite way of God. Worldly wisdom will tell you to go the opposite way of godly wisdom. You have to trust his guidance in those moments. Here's the problem. A recent study came out. So 8% of practicing Christians, practicing meaning they go to church once a month, 8% of practicing Christians have cracked their Bible open in the last week. How can you trust his guidance if you don't know it? Like, how can you follow his lead if you don't know what he's saying? You know, it would be, y'all remember MapQuest? It would be like if you were trying to get from here to Seattle and you printed out the directions on MapQuest. If you're not old enough to remember MapQuest, it was a website before we had GPSs, and it gave us directions. But it did not optimize for traffic, I don't think so, or tolls. But it was a little bit better than these things we used to have called maps. So anyway, MapQuest, you get the directions to get from here to Seattle, and you're like, all right, good to go. I'm gonna get there, and then you throw the directions in the back and never follow them. Like, that's what Christians nowadays are doing, apparently. That's what we do. We say we believe in God, but we're not following his guidance because we're not even reading it. So we have to trust his guidance. We need to know it too, right? The next thing, verses 7 and 8. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. We have to trust his heart. Fear the Lord and shun evil. We have to trust his heart. I did say this differently. We have to trust his intentions. This is where that whole process in the world starts to mess with us, because there's for me, people my age, the world I was brought up in and the wisdom that I was taught by people who were well-meaning and good people, but not necessarily biblically based, that wisdom will come into conflict with God's wisdom, right? And so what happens is, in this moment, we have, recently, people of my generation have started doing this thing where we deconstruct. That's what they call it, deconstruction. So what you do is you take your faith, you unpack it, and you take it all apart, and then you put it back together with worldly wisdom and philosophy, and then you see what you have left over. And what you have left over is going to be totally jacked up, and you're gonna have extra pieces because you used the wrong directions, right? And so that's what's happening. Why? Well, because we grew up in a world where there were these godly principles, but we were steeped in earthly wisdom. And then we were taught about a faith that's about me. So then God's not in his rightful place. We don't have a healthy fear of the Lord. And now we don't even know how to shun evil. And when the things get weird, we question his heart and his intentions. Does this make sense? That's what's happening. I don't want to speak for people that like don't have the sense. I'm only 33, so I don't speak for people who are older than me. For people my age and younger, that's what's happening. Is like, not only, the question is no longer, does God exist? Most people are in a place where they think there is some higher spiritual power. The question is whether the Christian God is good. And all of that is based on the shunning of godly wisdom and the acceptance of worldly wisdom. And what Solomon says here is to do the opposite. Fear the Lord, shun evil. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. If you live God's way, your life will be better. We have to trust his heart. Verses 9 and 10, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Trust his generosity. So we have to trust his generosity. We have to trust that he's going to be generous with us if we're faithful with him, right? Now, first of all, I want you to know we didn't pick this one because it had the money passage in it. For anybody who's being cynical this morning, that's not why we picked it. We picked it, if I'm being honest, we picked it because of verses, 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Sometimes it's useful to use verses that you think a bunch of people know, because you start from a good place. So that's why we picked this passage. But the money part's in it, and I'm not gonna skip it. Here's the thing. All of these other places we're gonna talk about this morning, or have talked about this morning, trust is a periodic thing. It's a periodic choice. Like it is a state of being to trust God, but also it's only hard sometimes in all of these other places, right? Like when you need his guidance, then you're gonna have to listen and you're gonna have to trust. But if we're being honest with ourselves, there are whole days we go through without asking for it. Is that good or is that bad? Probably not good. But there are some days that are just easy. There are also days when his guidance is something that I like and accept. That's easy to follow, no problem. It's only in the times when his guidance is hard on me that the rubber meets the road in terms of trust, right? And the same goes with trusting his heart, trusting his intentions. It's only in the times when things aren't going my way and I'm not sure that I like where he's sending me that trusting his heart is a problem. It's hard. When things are going right, it's easy to trust his heart, right? But here's the thing. When it comes to practicing trust as a daily discipline, financially is the only time that the rubber meets the road every day. Especially now. Anybody buy toilet paper lately? I went to the grocery store and for the first time, so I've always bought Glad grocery, this is not, you just follow me on this rabbit trail and we'll get back around, all right? I've always bought the Glad Flexi Force Flex trash bags, right? For one reason, that's what my mom always bought. So that's what I've always bought. I went to the grocery store the other day. They were $26 for a bag of 100. It's like, that's wild. So I bought the Food Line ones because they were like $13 for a bag of 90. You know what I mean? First time I bought the Food Line ones, I'm like, here we go. I'm on this train. Like, I like Food Line brand now, you know? And you know what's funny? They hold trash just as good. I don't even know. So it's almost like it's all marketing. But anyway, you know, the world is hard right now financially, right? And like, honestly, being faithful when it comes to first fruits, the principle of first fruits, giving him your first and your best. That's what the tithe is all about, to give him your first and your best, to honor him first because he is first. In times like these, it's hard. But if you want to see your trust for God grow, you want to see your faith in God grow, you want to see your faith in general, your walk with Jesus expand more and more, learn to trust him in these times through those means. Because here's the thing, a lot of times when we talk about this in the church, we talk about it in terms of generosity. Thank you for your generosity, generosity, generosity. That's because as a pastor, I'm operating a nonprofit. Therefore, I don't want to sound like an ungrateful person, right? So I say, thank you for your generosity. But the fact of the matter is, you can't be generous with something that you got given to you. You can't be generous. That's not the right way let me fix the thought. You can't be generous with something you can't be generous with God with something he gave you in the first place. You can't be generous with God with something he gave you in the first place, right? And so the fact of the matter is, what this is talking about here, we have to trust his generosity, is that if we are faithful with our finances and trusting him with them, then we can trust that he will be all the more generous in returning it more. That doesn't necessarily mean that if you tithe, you'll be rich. There are some churches who make a lot of money preaching that. That doesn't necessarily mean that if you tithe or give a big offering, a seed faith pledge of $10,000 today, right now, that you will be rich. That's not how that works. Remember, it's probabilities, not promises. But what it does mean, that if I want God to work in my day-to-day, I should trust him in my day-to-day. And if I trust him in my day-to-day, he will work in my day-to-day. So we have to trust his generosity, that as we're faithful with him, he'll be generous with us. 11 and 12. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves as a father delights, as a father, the son he delights in. So we have to trust his rebuke. This is the last thing. As living in this culture, I mean, I belabored the point earlier, we have a hard time trusting his guidance. We have a hard time trusting his intentions. I think we have lost the art of unpacking and applying his conviction. And that's what this is talking about, trust his rebuke. So remember this conversation between the conversation about sin versus like culturally, morally reprehensible. The delineation is important, right? Trying to figure that out, working through that with like fear and trembling and spiritually, in your spiritual life, like trying to figure that out, right? Because there are lots of things in the Bible there are lots of things in the world that aren't explicitly in the Bible, but God reveals his heart through the Bible, so you can kind of work through that, right? And so there's this, when it comes to sin and what I ought to be doing and what I ought not be doing, there's like this gray area, and that's where his rebuke comes into play. Are y'all tracking with me? Sin exists. It is wrong, and it is a thing that separates us from God. So I'm not saying that, but I am saying that there is some level of interpretation that comes into play, because here's a question for you. Does the Bible tell you whether or not it's wrong to go over the speed limit? No. But is it wrong for you to not follow the laws in the land you live in? Yeah. So is it wrong to go over? You see what I'm saying? Like there's some interpretation that's got to happen here. And here's another question. If the people who enforce the law are going to give you a 5-mile-an-hour grace section in how fast you go, are you allowed to go that 5 miles an hour or not? Like there's some interpretation that's got to happen here. You see what I'm saying? And so when it comes to his conviction, his rebuke, we have to trust that, and we have to learn to interpret that. We have to learn to feel that. We have to learn to deal with that. And what usually happens is, rather than hearing his conviction and his rebuke in our lives and then taking it and applying it, which ultimately is wisdom, what we tend to do, I think, in our culture is we'll be called out by God on something through his word, and then we'll go, oh, okay, or through somebody, or through a sermon or whatever, and we'll go, oh, okay, that's a problem. And then we'll spend the next day or two using the worldly wisdom that we've been steeped in to explain it away and why it's not sinful and why it's not a problem. And so we've lost the ability to hear his rebuke, apply it to our lives, and ultimately gain wisdom. And we have to fix that. We have to be humble enough. We have to be humble enough to work through that. We have to be humble enough to submit to him and hear his conviction and hear his rebuke and let that permeate through our lives and make us better. Because here's the problem. There are lots of us that started down this path of explaining away the sin that God confronts us with. There are lots of us that have done this, and that we've started down this path and we've gotten so good at it that we don't even hear the conviction anymore. And when it comes to growing in your faith, when it comes to growing in wisdom, and when it comes to becoming someone who is more holy, who is more like Jesus, if you can't hear the conviction, if you can't hear the rebuke, you can't move forward. So what we have is lots of Christians who essentially dropped out in 5th grade. We stopped learning. We never got any smarter. We never got any wiser. We never got any better. And we just sit here and we wonder why it doesn't work. It doesn't work because you haven't given him the space to speak in your life anymore. Because you didn't like what he had to say. And you allowed this worldly messed upness, this worldly wisdom that is ultimately messed up, to overtake the godly wisdom he was trying to impart. The job that we have to do when it comes to becoming more wise and becoming more understanding of God and what he is doing in and through us and around us. The job that we have to do, I think, is simple. I think that Solomon sums it up really well. We have to learn, first of all, as Christians, we need to be committed to understanding and learning his guidance. And if you're not reading your Bible, you're not doing it. But from there, we have to trust his guidance. We have to trust his heart in it. We have to trust his generosity with us. And then we have to trust his rebuke. These four things, honestly, I think are the antidote to that mess that I was trying to explain and probably didn't do the greatest job of. I think they're the antidote to that mess. Because what it does is it takes God and puts him on the throne and it answers some questions really easy for us. Is he good? Absolutely. Always has been, always will be. Is he first or am I first? He's first. He always has been, he always will be, and he can't be anything other than first. So if you put him in second, it's going to screw everything up because he's supposed to be first. I think it answers a lot of the questions. It simplifies a complex, jacked up world for us. We become wiser by trusting his guidance. We become wiser by trusting his heart. We become wiser by trusting that he'll be generous with us, and we become wiser by trusting his rebuke. Can I pray for you? God, let us be a people that put you in the place you belong, and that's first. Let us be a people that operate from a place of trust. God, I pray that you would grow each and every person in this room in trust and in faithfulness to the point that one day, rather than being the type of people that got to do the work of trusting you, got to figure out how we're going to trust you, got to work our way through it. Let us be people that trust you implicitly every time without thought, because you're that good and because you deserve it, and because we'd be better off and wiser for it. We love you and we thank you. Amen.